to all of you here, ladies and gentlemen. I have to start by really thanking iCreate and Sunil Parekh in particular for making this whole thing happen for me to come here and talk to you today. One, because I think there's just a tremendous sense of energy and optimism and creativity actually that the group that you represent is bringing to the table, right? And it's very, very energizing to be part of this. And I have to say I was very impressed and heartened to see all the great work that iCreate is doing, bringing together the right sets of stakeholders, a real sense of purpose, a real sense of action here. So all told, I think this is a terrific platform and we do look forward to in some way being part of this story and seeing iCreate scale up in its journey ahead. A little bit about McKinsey Global Institute. We are, so I have to say, though I will talk to you today about disruptive technologies and opportunities, I'm not a technology professional or a technologist. My background is actually, like perhaps many of you, it's more on the business and economics side. And McKinsey Global Institute is the business and economics research arm of McKinsey. We are very interested in looking at global trends which will have very dramatic transformational impact in all parts of the world, and to really understand how economies and enterprises are really affected by these trends. And technology and innovation is actually one of the big trends that MGI has been trying to research and trying to put our heads around and publish some work on. And we've been part of, I think, many interesting dialogues like this one in many countries around the world, including the US and China and Russia and Singapore, and increasingly now in India. So the genesis to our research in India was actually a global piece of research that we did around disruptive technologies, which we published in 2013. And one of the authors of that report was here at this forum, as was mentioned last year. When this was published, we were approached by the Prime Minister's National Innovation Council and by others across the private sector and government to say that, you know, while the global trends are interesting and important, it is very, very important for us to think about what would this list of, you know, potential technologies look like for India. And what are the disruptions as well as, you know, opportunities that will emanate for India arising from these global technology trends. So we built on our global research in technology and we married it with our in-depth understanding of India's economy and what's really driving growth and development in India. And we came up with this piece of work which we just published in December. And it's available it's in the public domain. I would encourage everybody to sort of download the report and take a look at it, and we might actually pick up some interesting perspectives from that. So that's sort of the motivation of, you know, how we ended up doing this piece of work. I want to talk briefly today at two levels. The first is to give you a sort of overview of the findings of our research, and that's a little bit it's at a higher level, it's looking forward, and it's kind of presenting what are the big trends and why this is so important for India. And then the next piece is going to be introducing a few business models or applications of these technologies in the Indian context that we think are particularly relevant or promising. And we've looked at a lot of sectors, but in the interest of time, I can't cover all of that, and you have some great speakers coming up who will focus on some of the sectors. So I hope that between them and me, you get a sort of overview of, you know, what this can look like for India across the board. Let's start with the context. So as you think about India, I think the challenges we face, whether it's in terms of you know, barriers to productivity, barriers to growth, this is something which is very important to think about and acknowledge upfront, whether it's in terms of the challenges in getting healthcare across to large numbers of the population, the challenges of learning outcomes in many of our schools and universities not being up to the mark, or the challenges indeed in terms of, you know, job creation and skill creation, some of the barriers we faced because of low transparency, leakages in many sectors where either natural resources are being wasted or financial resources are not sort of being deployed in the way that they should be deployed. This is the context. Why is this context important? Because in a way, these barriers, as you think about them, or these challenges, are actually opportunities, right? You've heard the famous saying that every crisis is actually an opportunity. In a way, the presence of some of these challenges points to latent, unmet needs or latent, untapped value creation, which is in a way hidden somewhere in the system, and a solution that is that addresses that need at a price point and based on a business model that works can actually create a lot of value. So we start with saying that, and we say that if we were to address these challenges in the sort of conventional paradigm, it's a lot of effort. I think there were references earlier to the number of jobs that we would need to create. It's a very large number by any metric. We would need to double the rate of growth of productivity across many sectors, but particularly from a poverty alleviation perspective in the agricultural sector. We need a lot of capital to build out our physical infrastructure, and we need to do it very efficiently. And then what is spent today as public resources to support growth and help people attain basic living standards is not spent efficiently. So you actually need to raise the efficiency of what's happening in India across multiple areas if you are to bring this population to a minimum standard of living which is acceptable for every Indian to realize their potential. In this context, we thought, we went down the list of global technologies and we identified the ones which are particularly relevant to India. There were 12 globally. What we found is 8 out of those 12 are extremely high potential, ready to scale and ready to create dramatic impact. We added 4 technologies which were not in the global list but are very relevant for India. So let me just share that with you. The first bucket of technologies that are going to be very high potential for India are the classic sort of digital technologies, where digitization is going to be the default model of working, living, interacting with each other in India in the coming decade. And the 5 different ways this is coming through, I think an explosion in just connectivity, particularly led by mobile as a device for internet connectivity, which makes it very personal, very accessible and coming in at a cost which is affordable. The second is really cloud technology, something that's well known, but again something that's going to open up the power of digital software and applications to large numbers of individuals as well as small businesses who otherwise would find it very complex to actually harness technology. But with the cloud, they can actually harness a lot of applications which they don't necessarily need to own or manage themselves. The third piece is automation of knowledge work. This is a fascinating technology trend, and actually it has very profound implications for the way we work around the world. So what this is really, the earlier generation of technology was a lot about things that automated physical work. So whether it was, the power loom replacing the hand loom, for example. So manual labor being substituted by technology was sort of the first wave. The big new wave that we are seeing unfolding is where work that we thought only human beings could do, which is cognitive work, or work that involves interaction, human interaction, work that involves human judgment and decision making. These kinds of work are being substituted by technology. And being substituted in some ways, I think, more effectively as well as more efficiently. So this means that knowledge workers, ranging from programmers all the way to even journalists, who are in the writing business, for example, and certainly a lot of people who are doing customer interface kinds of roles, a lot of this kind of work with digitization, with automation, is being transformed. These workers are actually going to find over a period of time that many of the more routine things that they were doing, spending their time doing, is going to be done by intelligent software and intelligent applications on their behalf. Which means that they get more productive, they have more time to spend on doing different things, but what those different things are is still to be seen. But this is one big trend which is sweeping the world, and India is going to be part of that as well. The last two in this digital bucket were actually not globally disruptive technologies. And this is because India is at a stage where digital payments and digital identity are going to be game changers, and we consider them therefore as part of our top 12 technology trends. These are well established in other parts of the world, but we are at a stage where in the next 10 years these are going to enable huge amounts of technology adoption across other sectors. And we're seeing real momentum on both these, and so we include them here. The second bucket is actually technologies, and these are still largely digital technologies, not entirely, but largely digital technologies, which really improve and enable us to manage our physical environment a lot better. So the Internet of Things, clearly, the decline in the cost of sensors is going to make Internet of Things something that's much more ubiquitous, perhaps not as ubiquitous as mobile internet, but certainly whether it's consumer appliances which are networked, whether it's vehicles, particularly cars which are networked, or whether sensors and such like are used across the spectrum in transportation networks or irrigation networks or water management systems, you're going to see a lot more of that. Related to that are the smart applications around using intelligent software to manage physical distribution of goods, services, people, transport management, traffic management, logistics management at ports, a lot of intelligent systems at the back that capture the data from a lot of these IoT devices and others, and then very intelligently optimize how these flows should actually move. GIS we consider for India particularly relevant and high potential. And this is largely because of the sheer geographical vastness as well as diversity of the country and the opportunity. So as you think about India as a big unified market, you need to go a lot more granular in terms of understanding the potential or the resources of each part of India and managing that. So GIS comes in there. And then genomics, which was again a global technology trend, being applied in India, particularly in the context of agriculture and healthcare, we felt is extremely high potential as well. And the last piece is actually the energy bucket, and this is identical. I think any country around the world would pretty much have these three energy-related technologies in their top 12, simply because energy is a global, it's a global market. You get affected, of course, by global developments in these technologies, but also because of India's unique challenges around energy security and energy inclusion. So unconventional oil and gas, renewables, and all sorts of energy storage and efficiency technologies. I also just want to spend 30 seconds on an additional 4 technologies which we didn't consider in our top 12. Not because they're less important, or not because they're less interesting, but we felt that they were not likely to have such widespread impact for change in India. But these are also something I would encourage all of you to sort of keep on the radar, whether it's robotics and the way robotics is transforming manufacturing. Some changes or developments in autonomous or near autonomous vehicles. Maybe driverless cars is a bit far away for India, but there are many aspects of this technology which are already being used in electronic appliances and cars. So simply, more intelligent braking systems, for example. It's core to autonomous vehicle technology, but it's being used even in cars with drivers now. So there are many applications which might be relevant. 3D printing, which has the potential to transform manufacturing in many ways. Lots of enthusiasm about this. A lot of IT companies in India are already setting up, 3D printing labs to start exploring what can be done. So this is something that's quite promising. And finally, the whole nanomaterials and advanced materials space, which is going to permeate a lot of product design, right, in terms of the actual materials used. A simple point, I don't want to get into numbers, but this page and the next page are really laying out the potential adoption of these technologies that we would see in the coming decade for India. I think this is important because of the concept of a sort of tipping point in the adoption of a technology. And here's what that tipping point says. For many of these technologies, these are really platforms, and the minute you cross a certain threshold, in the case of the mobile phone, for example, that threshold is about 30 to 40% of the population being on the mobile phone. When that happens, you suddenly start getting very powerful network effects. Because there are so many potential consumers who are on this platform, it's opening up a lot of innovation opportunities for people to come in and offer services that use that platform. That network effect is not visible maybe at 5 to 10% adoption, but once it crosses that tipping point, there are tremendous virtuous cycle benefits. And because of the services people avail them, there is faster adoption of that technology, and the cost of that technology starts coming down. So the simple point here is, I think we see that tipping point being reached very soon for some of these technologies, and certainly for all these technologies in the time span of, let's say, 5 to 7 years. And this is equally true of, the non-digital technologies, though I would say somewhat less so. The digital ones are a little bit more here and now and ready for mass adoption. But even in the other technologies, we would see those tipping points being reached pretty soon. So finally, why should we care about all this? In our research, we looked at the technologies, but then we looked at 40 to 50 use cases or business models which leverage these technologies. Combinations of technologies that come together to address needs of consumers across a variety of sectors. And we did a very simple thing. We said that there are these use cases that already exist. What if, what is the reasonable level of scaling of this opportunity that you can see in the next 10 years? And if you apply reasonable assumptions on how that scaling works, what is the economic impact of these business models or these use cases of the underlying technologies? Now, when you think about economic impact, this is really important because we are not talking about the amount that people are going to invest in these technologies. We are talking about, from an end user perspective, what is the additional output or additional income or additional the resources that end users of these technology ideas may actually be saving, the time saved, the cost saved. So this is value on the table which is likely to be captured by users of these technology applications. And the implication is some of that value will get retained and held by the user or the consumer. Some of it gets captured by whoever is packaging this and the entrepreneur basically, who is packaging this idea and being able to sell it as a technology-enabled idea. How that value pool splits up is something that's really, very difficult to predict. But it's a sizable value. It's up to $1 trillion of GDP equivalent in the year 2025, so that's an annual effect. In other words, 20 to 30% of India's incremental economic growth would be driven by technology innovation. It's a huge prize or a huge opportunity that could potentially unfold. And we've really looked at, done a double click on 6 sectors which drive about 50% of this impact. So a lot of disruption, but a lot of incremental value creation. Big question in terms of who really gets to capture this value pool. In our experience around the world, the consumer does end up the biggest beneficiary and the entrepreneur ends up the biggest beneficiary. These are really, the 2 biggest stakeholders who benefit from this. What about workers? What about workers and employees, right? How are these technologies actually going to transform the work we do? The value created is because workers get more productive. Productivity means they deliver better output or more output with the same amount of time or resources. So if you think about it in a slightly different way, what it means is that there is a certain amount of labor input that's being released that is no longer required to do the things that they were doing. And if you look at how much that can be, that's a sizable number. It's about 20 to 30 million jobs or equivalents of jobs being in a way sort of available for reshaping. One way to interpret this is that, does this mean that 20 to 30 million people get jobless because of technology? But that's not the right way to interpret this, because this has been true for the last 100 years. Technology is not something new. Technology has been around for 100 years and constantly new innovations are coming to the table. We are still all employed and we are still doing productive work. So the real message is that the nature of work will change to the extent of, at least if you think about knowledge workers like us, 40 to 50% of what we do today may be very different 10 years out, or our equivalent peers will be doing very different work 10 years out, and therefore the re-education and re-skilling of people is a huge priority in the context of this technology evolution. Because people have to be constantly kept ready for adapting to new kinds of work, absorbing these technologies, but also moving on to more higher value added work. And the last point on jobs, which I also want to emphasize, is that it's very interesting how these technologies will actually empower and create new kinds of jobs for new kinds of workers. So coming back to the point around automation of knowledge work, in the old world, you expected a knowledge worker to have gone through a lot of formal education, a college degree, maybe a postgraduate degree, to do certain kinds of work, whether it's in the healthcare sector or the education sector or the financial sector. What we're finding is, because intelligence can be embedded in applications which are very easy to use, those high value, high quality jobs can be performed by people with a lot less formal education, with some purposeful training, and oriented towards maybe interacting with consumers, but being able to use these intelligent devices which embed a lot of the formal knowledge, which is not really something each of these community workers, for want of a better word, is able to bring to the table. And we're seeing examples of this across all sectors. We think that whether it's the agricultural extension worker or the financial correspondent who becomes a financial planner without sort of 5 years of a degree in commerce plus something, without a master's in financial planning, because the device that he's using actually embeds a lot of that knowledge. So this, we think, is a very empowering and positive contribution that technology will play in reshaping the world of work in India. We all know about the current government's thrust towards technology in many ways, of which Digital India is one flagship component, so we won't sort of go into that. But while this is encouraging, I think what is interesting is some of the implications of our research on the way Digital India should shape going forward. And these are some sort of very high-level design principles which we think the government is thinking about and actively adopting, right? The first of these is that Digital India is much, much more than digital government. This is not just about e-governance, or it's not just about bringing, digital or computer-based applications into the delivery of government services, but this is about a lot of private sector enterprise driving technology-based solutions using Digital India as a basic platform. And I think there is an appreciation of this that's emerging in the ecosystem, which is very positive. The implications are that what really the government needs to do and will and should do is to build the underlying assets, whether it's the broadband network or the digital identity platform, but to really treat these as platforms for open access, so that all entrepreneurs and innovators like you can actually utilize them in a very open way, in a way that protects consumer rights and consumer privacy, but can utilize those building blocks and assets to deliver services which the government on its own will never be able to deliver. And also the fact that there is really no one solution. India is too diverse a country, and there's space and need for lots and lots of innovation. So what you really need to do as sort of as the government, is to kind of build this platform and encourage innovators to use it in many diverse ways. So Parag, you must guide me in terms of the time availability.
I want some time for interacting.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe another 5 minutes.
Another 5 minutes. I have a bunch of examples in here of how these technologies are playing out already across different sectors, but I'm not going to go through all of that because I would, most of this, all of it is actually written up in the report, and we're happy to share that and have follow-on conversations. But maybe I will present 2 or 3 examples which are actually quite compelling. We talked about financial services a bit, but let me talk about this example. I find this particularly compelling because you are using technology to solve a really basic problem and you have a lot of odds stacked against you, but this is a model that works. So this is a model for rural primary and preventive health care delivered to poor communities at their doorsteps. In an environment where doctors and nurses are really at a premium, they're very scarce resources and they're practically not there. So in this system, and this is a very sophisticated technology solution which has been developed along with the University of Pennsylvania by the local team here. So there's a lot of know-how and sophistication that's gone into it, but it's a grassroots solution. So in this solution, you have these community workers who are trained. They might have some amount of health or medical training, but they're not fully competent doctors. But they're trained for about 12 weeks or so to use a simple handheld application. They go door to door to consumers or villagers in their ecosystem. And the device actually helps them geotag and create a unique identity for that household. So then that household exists in the system and can be referenced. The device will actually help them perform a basic screening of a bunch of health parameters, and they are guided to do this. That information is then analyzed at the back end, and the risk factors are brought to the front, and a recommendation in terms of next steps or any sort of diagnostics required is actually made by the system and conveyed by the health worker. There are low-cost diagnostic equipments or tools, and that's another huge area of sort of innovation that's happening in India, which is low-cost medical technology. But these tools are actually used to check blood sugar, blood pressure, ECGs, and so on. And that data is again captured into the central cloud-based health management information system. And then the whole prescription and the follow-up sort of program for this particular household is tracked, it's managed and tracked centrally by this device. So you're able to achieve at low cost and with low human resource capacity what typically is a much more high cost, high human resource type of endeavor. And that's, I think, very promising, and similar ideas are unfolding in a lot of parts of the world. Again, on healthcare, I think the whole revolution, we're seeing this much more in developed countries, but around home-based healthcare, which is based off the revolution that's happening in wearables and other technologies which help monitor health parameters, capture that automatically, feed it into a system, and run a set of alerts and feedbacks, part of which may be fully automated. So an automated SMS message or an email to the patient or the patient's caregivers. Part of it may be a more expert mediated, so a doctor getting an alert and deciding what to do. But a lot of automation in there in healthcare. Education there are phenomenal examples, and this is one that comes from Kenya actually, where the whole school is run based on a mobile or a tablet app, including the scripting of lesson plans which the teacher actually delivers in class, including all the administration of the school. So this is a very low cost school. 50% of the students of this school are actually below the poverty line, equivalent poverty line in Kenya. And the learning outcomes are actually better than other schools in the system. So you can apply this actually even in, I would imagine, some of the best schools in India, because there is huge scope to improve learning outcomes by reducing the variability that happens when teaching is completely left to the teacher to determine. Just one or two more examples maybe, which come from different sectors. I think, let's just talk about manufacturing at a very high level. I think the bringing of all these digital technologies into the plant, end to end, right from the prototyping and R&D stage, through all elements of this manufacturing supply chain, and including the maintenance and spare parts. There is evidence right now of large numbers of large numbers in terms of productivity saving or time to market being achieved by manufacturing plants across different sectors. GE, for example, is able to run a very distributed manufacturing environment. You are able to, for example, control and manage a contract manufacturer in China, because right down to the utilization of every machine, that data is actually consolidated and managed in real time out of your hub, maybe in New York or wherever. So lots of sort of very different models of being able to control distributed manufacturing. I think crashing of cycle times in prototyping because of virtual and 3D printing and so on. So your ability to prototype a product is actually transforming in a very dramatic way. And then finally, one sort of huge idea for India, which is really around marketplaces, particularly labor market. We have labor and human resources is what we have in abundance, but the matching of demand and supply is it's really at a very, very low level in India. I mean, there are no formal mechanisms for 90% of the market or more to match, where is the job and where is the person. And that leads to a huge amount of inefficiency both for employers as well as for job seekers. This is a great example of informal sector workers who are able to just put in a missed call and get a reply from this jobs marketplace to help them create a CV, find an opportunity. They can actually pay for this service very similar to a mobile top-up kind of a model of payment. So there is a track record that you can, as an employer, you know who this person is, so there is more security in employing these people. So lots of inefficiencies in the labor market being addressed by something like a digital marketplace. And you can apply the same idea for lots of asset markets. If you have warehouse space or you have transportation networks, there is so much underutilization of each of these assets simply because matching is not happening. And bringing matching platforms, I think, is a huge idea that we'll see a lot of innovation around. So finally, just to conclude, I think I'm not going to talk about some of these sectors. You'll hear more from, I think, better experts on this. I just want to conclude with this set of 4 implications, right? One is that with technology, the traditional sources of value may very rapidly erode, whether it's branches or store locations or traditional, I have competitive advantage because my factory or my plants are well located. Many of these advantages may erode. The second point is that a lot of advantage will come from the consumer end of the whole chain. So businesses that really delight and satisfy consumer needs will be sort of better advantaged as sort of businesses get disrupted. The third thing is, I think, the data intensity of all work and all business will rapidly zoom, and this will be a new skill set which is actually in high demand in terms of comfort with data and data analytics that people will begin to expect. And finally, the whole talent attraction and retention challenge and opportunity will just become that much more important. So we are in a way emphasizing that talent actually becomes more important in a technology-rich context, despite the nature of work will changing very substantially. So let me just stop there. There is a lot of research on our website around India. We've done great work in China. We've done some work in Southeast Asia. We've done the global piece as well. So would encourage anyone who's interested to go tap that, and happy to take questions. And
at this point, I think we will take 5 questions. I am biased towards the youth. You might not be. So I'm going to pick.
Your privilege. I'm with you.
Do we have any questions? Do I see any hands? We don't charge for questions, it's free. I know Ahmedabad is like it's free. Yeah? We have a gentleman over there. Sir, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Deepak. Just a quick question in terms of, there's a lot of groundwork happening on the digitalization of India and whatnot. But the real thrust for the core is data, and it seems to be happening in the context. So whatever is happening on the ground, if there's no open data out there, it's very hard for us to kind of understand what's happening in the marketplace. How to convert that information into something more innovative and then something more useful to the society and the businesses as normal. So it's really upon the government now to actually come out with more information, more data. GIS, for example, nobody knows where the boundary lies. As simple as that. So, any thoughts, ideas?
We take them as we go here. No, that's a great question, and I think in our sort of research we do emphasize the need for open data as one very important initiative that the government should drive. This is the case globally, and there are efforts around the world, and India has also we've started an open data initiative. One of the big challenges, as you can appreciate, other than the back end, digital data just not being there in some cases, but the bigger challenge is actually mindsets, which I think the people who are doing, the open data initiative for government are the first to talk about the mindset challenge, to say that giving up data is a hard sort of mindset barrier to overcome. So that's, I think, work in progress, but I think what's powerful is a bit of this whole connectivity piece, and the reason I say this is because you can push something so far, but it's much more powerful if consumers are pulling it. And if there is a massive rise in sort of connectivity and just getting people hooked and connected and part of this, and therefore demanding more digital services, and therefore demanding more digital data, and entrepreneurs also therefore being able to pull that in a very different way. I think that will be a very powerful part of gaining some momentum on this whole open data initiative.
I'm having the questions related with the technology promoted startups. Means they started with one particular thing, that is discounts. When I really go through the business models of this particular technology startup, means I'm having a doubt. It will sustain for the longer period of time or not? Means they start with discounts, and what's your say on that?
That's another great question. I think these are companies that have raised large amounts of capital, so I don't know if I should have a perspective on whether it will sustain or not, or the people who put in say $2 billion clearly have a perspective that it will sustain, which may or may not be true. But I think let's look at it. It's very hard to say whether this is a bubble right now, overpriced, can sustain, hard to say. But we have the benefit of looking at China's e-commerce or e-tailing revolution, which is at least 10 years ahead of India, right? And has really achieved scale as, I think, the biggest e-tailing market now, outstripping the US. Now, when you look at the data in China, what is very interesting is that e-commerce it's unclear who's making money, are investors making money, all those things are unclear. But the point is there is underlying productivity and value being unlocked for the economy because of e-commerce. The ability of e-commerce to open up consumption and retail markets in tier 2, tier 3 cities is a fact. At least 40% of the consumption base in e-commerce is estimated as stuff that wouldn't otherwise have happened without these digital platforms. The fact that millions of SMEs are actually able to participate in the economy, that is unlocking a huge amount of value. So I think the underlying economic case over a period of time for this is well established. at a point in time there is always an attacker entry strategy, and whether that is a wise one or will sustain is a bit of how are the investors looking at it versus how are the capital raisers looking at it. So.
Yes.
First of all, thank you for sharing this data. It was immensely helpful. Now, what I see from the data now, I will definitely look at the complete report. But what I can see is you have done the macro cycles, the industry factor which is affecting the macro cycles in terms of any company or any industry factors. And one interesting point that you have raised is the tipping point from where it will move up. Now, I want to know a bit more about what are the factors affecting to reach the tipping point for various technologies like digital, for example, and for IoT, for example, like automation of data. What are the factors affecting positive or negative, which are barriers to reach to the tipping point, and what are the positive which we should focus more to reach to the tipping point?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think one factor which is driving this tipping point is actually a global factor. In a way, it has nothing to do with India. It is the dramatic scale achieved in many of these technologies in other markets, which are crashing the cost. So it's the technology innovation as well as market scale economies from all other parts of the world, and China is actually leading the charge on many of these, due to which things like the cost of smartphones or the cost of sensors or the cost of actuators is actually crashing much faster perhaps than a lot of people would have anticipated. And that is a positive for us in terms of reaching tipping point, because affordability as a barrier can get addressed faster and faster. So that I would say is one. The second thing is some of the markers that we would look for, right? How do we judge whether we are making good progress on moving towards the tipping point or not? I think one good marker to actually track is this whole notion of high quality internet access from an infrastructure perspective. Whether it's 4G mobile or whether it's NOFN-led broadband, but how much is that infrastructure actually growing? And it's in a way still early days, because there's been a lot of intent, there's a lot of planning, there are new business models being thought of in terms of how do we engage the private sector, telecom or other players to help us do this. So it's still work in process, but I think over the next couple of years, that is a very important marker to track, to say that are we reaching this tipping point faster or slower. And then finally, I think I'm quite optimistic when people pose this as a challenge, which is the whole language fragmentation in India, which is very different from other parts of the world. Particularly if you look at China, they don't face this issue quite as much. We are a linguistically very diverse country. But I draw a lot of faith from our media entertainment industry, right, which has shown that they can breach all language barriers and create content. If you have the pipes that can carry video in a compelling way, I'm sure content creation can also move in pace.
The only in terms of Indian, the diversity of the Indian culture, about language, about culture, so that obviously I will look into the reports and focus more on the opportunity of those areas. But thank you for this.
Thank you. Gentlemen,
I'm a management consultant and an entrepreneur. So my question is on behalf of all the entrepreneurs, like entrepreneurs are in continuous search of knowledge about, if you are having an idea, you should have this knowledge about the market, about the sector in which you want to nurture your idea. So is there a formal mechanism developed by McKinsey or already exists to supply that relevant knowledge to that entrepreneur so that he can have more idea about how the things look like at a global level?
I think MGI, which is one everyone to use, and we want more people to use it and challenge it and help us improve it, frankly. So it's all out there and lots of stakeholders use it. And otherwise, I think McKinsey also publishes a lot in terms of its other sectors and practices based on client work. So I would really encourage you to look at McKinsey Quarterly. That's a great, very business-oriented. MGI tends to be a bit more macro and somewhat policy-oriented as well. But McKinsey Quarterly is very business-oriented and can, I'm sure, give you enough food for thought.
so is there a lady entrepreneur in the crowd that wants a question? Going once? Going twice? If I don't see your hand, stand up please. No? I think we need to do something about that. MGI.
Incidentally, we're doing a project.
Any of our speakers, please engage with iCreate on social media or send us an email at whatnext@icreate.org.in We will get it to the speakers and we'll get you an answer. Last question, please.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. I am H.K. Shah. I am a chartered accountant and management advisor. I probably have got a probable answer to that gentleman who asked about these discounts in e-sector. I had a privilege and first-hand experience of getting finance for a small e-retailer, Book My Wish. The bank was sane enough to understand this project, and today is a partner to Flipkart Advantage. So probably the discounts are given with a view that in future the data mining is going to be a big business, and the data that these people and I would say the cluster of customers that they are going to acquire is going to be a future profit, and it is all about perception of future profits that this happens. So madam can correct me or improve my knowledge on this. Thank you.
I just want to add or amplify challenge and open up new ways of even monetizing that value, right? So it may not be the conventional way, it may be advertising, it may be other sources of value that you tap into, you substitute other parts of the consumer's wallet. For example, what he or she is spending on education or health suddenly becomes converted into a digital spend, right? So there will be different ways of monetizing value, but that itself is an evolving space, I think.
Well, so we're